Is Lumen a game changer for understanding your metabolism, or just an expensive way to tell you that you ate carbs? Let's dive in. Alright, so Lumen did send me the device to test, but this video is not sponsored. If you decide it's right for you, I'll put a link below, but either way, you're getting my honest opinion. So let's talk for a second about what the Lumen device actually measures. Basically, you take a single guided breath, an inhalation, a 10-second hold, and a 6-second exhalation, which was actually really hard for me to do in the beginning. Then in Lumen's app, you get a report, a number between 1 and 5. And that's basically measuring your percent CO2. In general, higher carbon dioxide or percent CO2 usually means more carb use, and lower means more fat burn. One of the limitations with this device, though, is that it measures your resting state. So it's always assuming that you actually rested before you take the measurement. So as usual with any device or wearable, treat this for trends, not precise percentages. Now let's talk for a second about the price. It typically can range between $299 and $599, depending on promotions, the bundle, and the subscription that you purchase. Which, yes, you do have to have a subscription to their app in order to have the device function. Alright, so I used it for 90 days and my husband used it for about 60. Let's cover what I liked about it. I will give it that it looks great and feels great. It feels like a premium product. And when it comes to charging, it holds a charge for upwards of 2 weeks. That's at least my experience with it. And Lumen let me test out the Lumen Duo subscription, which is where you can use one device for 2 people. So my husband and I shared one device with separate profiles pretty much easily. Initially, there was a bit of a challenge trying to get his account set up with mine, but in the end it worked out. What I also liked was the education included in the app. They have short unlockable lessons on metabolism, metabolic flexibility, which I found genuinely helpful, especially for people that don't understand any of this. After using it for 90 days, I personally found clear, repeatable patterns as long as I was using the device properly when testing. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a bit, but the patterns that I noticed primarily revolved around my menstrual cycle. I noticed generally more carb burn right before and during my menstrual cycle. And I also noticed after bad sleep or a stressful night, I'd wake up often in carb burn. So that's all useful context, but let's talk about what backfired. The worst thing for both myself and my husband was the color psychology of the index. Yellow corresponds to a 4, and orange corresponded to a 5, which when you breathe into it and you keep getting those numbers and colors, you think that you failed, even when the physiology of the carb burn versus fat burn made complete sense. So needless to say, it got in both of our heads. Which brings me to the next topic, which is that the protocol of breathing really does matter. You're supposed to be measuring your breath in a relaxed state, preferably sitting or lying down. But if you wake up and don't measure your wake-up breath immediately, you walk around, you feed pets, you do household chores, then you only sit for 15 seconds instead of the full 2 minutes that they recommend. Because let's be honest, when you say, yeah, I sat down for 2 minutes, you actually only sat down for 15 seconds. You're not actually in a rested state, and therefore you're not following the protocol, which I found myself not doing a lot. It's really easy to not want to have to sit down for 2 minutes and relax before doing this test, and also it's easy to forget to do so. So naturally, after doing morning chores, when I sat down, I got a reading of a 5. But I tried it out and I waited 5 minutes of sitting and doing gentle breathing before, and then I ended up going from a 5 to a 2. But that's just my physiology. That's not a device error. In general, when you're walking around and you're doing things, bending over, picking things up, and you're sustaining a moderate level of energy for longer than 2 minutes, you're naturally going to be burning more glucose. So then when you sit down, you calm down, you relax, you return your breathing back to normal, you can expect a bit more fat burn naturally. So if you're going to be using the Lumen device, you absolutely have to follow this protocol. Now let's touch base on another place where Lumen kind of falls short, or at least the device version that I tested. If you are on a ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting and your body is pushing a ketogenic state, the device will not always be as accurate. In fact, since the device that I use only sensed CO2 percentage, it could be confounded by ketones. And in general, I did find this in some of my other research that a lot of other users found that if they were fasting or in a ketogenic state, then the reports can be misleading. Now, Lumen very recently released the Lumen Pro, which is supposed to be better at reading your breath if you were in a ketogenic state. But they didn't send me that one to test, so I can't say if it's actually accurate. Now, before I touch on research behind this device and popular opinion from the people of Reddit, I want to touch base on my personal bottom line with this. So here's the thing. I already eat well. I bet you're surprised at that one considering the nature of this channel. So, I didn't really fully benefit from using the Lumen, especially when it comes to a nutrition standpoint. At this point in my health journey, I get way more value from sleep quality and quantity, as well as tracking cardiovascular health. So, Lumen was interesting and educational, but the color scores and testing discipline weren't worth the mental overhead for me. But naturally, since this channel is research focused, I pulled up the research associated with the Lumen device. And here's 3 studies that were small but useful. So this first article tested within the same person their fasted RER and then after glucose. This lab validation study was completed with 33 healthy young adults. What they did was they measured the respiratory exchange ratio using indirect calorimetry under a ventilated hood and compared against the Lumen percent CO2 at rest. And what happened was both of the CO2 percentages went up. So why that matters is that this article proves that Lumen works at measuring when you ate carbs and is useful at measuring your metabolic shift at rest. The second article was essentially about high carb versus low carb weeks. And the question was, can Lumen tell the difference between 2 different types of diet? So in a randomized crossover study, which everybody did both weeks, they ate the same amount of calories across both types of diet. 27 recreationally active adults completed the study, and they did 1 low carb week of about 20% carbs, and then they had 1 high carb week of about 60% carbs. Then they took Lumen readings at fasted, morning, pre-evening, and pre-bed. What happened was the high carb week showed consistently higher average Lumen readings. Now the question, so what? Basically, Lumen can differentiate between 2 different diet types when macros are clearly different. But the study also validated that looking at the weekly averages was a better approach than obsessing over 1 morning or 1 reading. Now, this third research study answers probably one of the most important questions. Do health markers improve when Lumen is used inside a lifestyle program? This article covered a pre-diabetes program of 12 weeks. However, it was a single-arm intervention with no control group, and they tested 27 adults with prediabetes. What the participants did was that they followed Lumen's daily feedback and coaching alongside a planned 500 kcal deficit per day. They did that intervention for 12 weeks and measured their weight, their waist, and their labs before and after. What happened was that on average, weight decreased by about 6%, their waist dimensions and visceral fat did go down, their hemoglobin A1C went down, their triglycerides went down, their systolic blood pressure went down, and their fasting glucose changed a little. So what? Well, that means that they improved by the dietary approach of reducing their calories by 500 calories a day for 12 weeks. And you can't really credit the Lumen alone in doing that, especially considering there was also no control group. The 12-week program that they created included the ingredients that the individuals needed to consume and the calorie deficit included within that plan. So I don't really think that Lumen can be attributed to the success of these individuals in this research study. So the main takeaways from these research studies is that Lumen detects carb-driven shifts at rest in the correct direction. It can be best used only for trend data as long as you test in standardized resting conditions. And for dietary experiments, compare weekly means, especially fasted pre-evening and pre-bed. So there's clinical promise inside a structured program, but we will still need randomized controlled trials to isolate what the device itself adds. So now you've heard my opinion, the analysis of the research studies. Let's hear from the people of Reddit. Some of the most upvoted themes included that the product is a gimmick and that it is not worth it, especially if you already do the basics. calorie control, getting adequate protein, strength training, getting your steps in. Not to mention quality sleep. Many Reddit users complained about the subscription and data lock-ins, that if you cancel your subscription, you lose all your data, and that your device won't work unless you have a subscription to their app. Other users could not stand the testing burden. They felt like 4 to 6 times a day felt like a second job, and many of which preferred passive wearables. Often there were complaints of inconsistent readings, but it's also possible that these people didn't follow the protocol because it's easy not to. There were frustrations about the ketogenic state mismatched reports, and of course the always present issue with customer support. But what were the positives on Reddit? That's typically hard to find anyways. Well, some positives were that it was helpful for macro-curious non-keto users who liked scores and streaks. Some people like the device for finding their morning trends to plan pre-workout carbs, but where I align with the opinions of Reddit is that I agree on the subscription friction. And personally, I don't like how color-coded scores can mess with your head. I can say that I really did appreciate the education that is in the platform, because it shows that as a company, they value the foundations. But it's really up to the users if they're going to watch it or not. I also did like that I got to become more aware of my menstrual cycle shifts and my stress and sleep habits. But you really can only benefit from it if you follow the protocol strictly. So who could even consider using Lumen? In general, it might be a good fit if you're not doing keto or extended fasting. You will test consistently, fasted in the morning, in a seated or lying position with greater than 5 minutes of calm breathing first. If you like the scores, the streaks, and you want a light nudge for carb timing. And I think it might be really good for people who need to break into understanding nutrition in the first place. I am not that person, but I know there are a lot of people out there that might benefit from those gentle reminders and becoming aware of what they're eating. But you won't want to buy the Lumen at all if you're on the ketogenic diet, doing intermittent fasting, if you prefer passive tracking, if you dislike subscriptions or need full data access after canceling something, or if you're really score reactive and the colors can hijack your headspace, or if you have any eating disorders, I strongly discourage against getting it. So my overall verdict is that Lumen is not a magic metabolism meter, but it can be a useful trend tool for non-keto users who'll respect the protocol and might want a motivational nudge. If the colors or the subscription stress you out, or you're already doing really well with nutrition, put your budget towards strength training, a food scale, or anything to improve the quality of your sleep. For me and my husband, sleep and sleep tracking and cardiovascular health deliver far more value. So needless to say, after 90 days, I'm not using it. But if you still want to try it, I'll drop a link below. And if this video helped you, hit the like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what, if anything, Lumen changed for you if you happen to use it. That's all for this video, and as always, remember, your health is an investment, not an expense. I'll see you in the next one.